Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. This is because of Shavuot. This is a short week, which is unfortunate because Naso is a really long Parsha. So we'll try today to do a range of Rambans from the different major portions of the Parsha. The two really big, sort of halachic, also in some way story type portions of the Parsha are sota, and obviously a nazir. And then you have the enormous part of the Parsha, which is the repetition of the korbanot Nesiim. And so I want to also do a Ramban on that, which might help explain, and for me is a very significant Ramban in terms of the repetition and why it's so necessary to repeat each Nasi rather than saying v'chein hikriv, v'chein hikriv, v'chein hikriv. But let's start with sota, which is fascinating in a number of ways. And this first Ramban may be obvious to you. You may have always read the Psukim that way. I'll admit for myself, I did not. I thought it was a huge chiddush, although as I look back, it does seem to be pshat in the Psukim. So the whole idea of a sota is, the husband suspects the wife, tells her, you may not have yichud with this person. She has yichud. There are no eidim as to what happened. And so we go to the process of drinking the mei sota. And if you look in the middle of that section, the Torah says, right? Two possibilities. She did it or she didn't do it. So the husband brings his wife to the Kohen, and that's kind of the key words. Vehiviet karbana aleha. We'll leave that untranslated. Asiri taifa kemach sarim. What korban is brought? Barley. Lo yitzok alav shemen. No oil. Lo yiten alav nevana. No frankincense. Why? Ki minchat kinaoti. Because it's kind of an angry korban. It's a korban of jealousy. Minchat zikaron mazkeret avon. The whole purpose of the korban is to recall a sin that she may or may not have committed. Okay, so the Ramban on that pasuk, on pasuk Tesvav, says, Lo yitzok aleh shemen, shelo yekis, first he quotes Rashi, shelo yeh karbana mehudar, she has to bring barley because it's animal food, and she doesn't bring levona because the imahot were called levona, and she's not. Okay, ki minchat kinaot, ha kemach hazem ma'oret ba shtei kinaot. Right, what's the plural kinaot? So it gets two people angry. Kinat hamakom, Vikinat habal. Okay, those are the Rashis. Now says the Ramban, and I'm not sure it's 100% literal. Va'altat kol hamefarshim, says the Ramban, everybody explains, ki minchat kinaot hu, lomar ba'avur shezot hamincha minchat onesh, he grua lihiyot sarim below shemen ulvona, because it's a punishment, this korban. It doesn't have shemen ulevana ki amincha asher azkarata l'ratzon Hashem ba'as solet chitim b'shemen ulevana. Because korbanot that we bring l'ratzon Hashem to appease HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they're brought with shemen and levana, and this korban is not. This is, as I mentioned before, it's kind of an angry korban. It's a result of something terrible that happened, and so it's not brought with the normal, joy and the normal gratefulness to God. Now the main point of the Ramban, I think. Ulefi dati tam ki minchat kinaotu yachzol rosh hapasuk. Yomar sheyavi ha'ish et hakarban al ishto. Says the Ramban, it's not a korban that, even though you might have thought so, and to be honest, even though I thought so, that it's a korban that the woman brings. Says the Ramban, no, the woman doesn't bring the korban at all. He brings the korban on behalf of his wife, kilomar b'mekoma, in her place. Ki minchat kinaoti lahazkir avona. The whole point of the korban is to recall her sin. So therefore, ve'inenu ra'ui shetivienu hi mishala. It doesn't make any sense that we would force her to bring of her own money a korban that's going to recall her guilt and her sin. Aval hu yakriv mincha lashem sheyikaneh et kinato v'yinkom et nikmato mimena. Rather, he brings his korban of his own money to Hashem, that God should take revenge and should avenge and should be angry for him the disloyalty of his wife. And would take his revenge on her. So first of all, you could argue, and I went back, I read the psukim a number of times, and let's go back to sort of the psukim that we didn't translate before. Vehevi ha'ish et ishto al hakohen, vehevi et karbana aleha. So when you go back, it could be read both ways. Vehevi et karbana aleha, she brings her own karban, or vehevi et karbana aleha, he brings her karban, or he brings his karban for her. Obviously, she has a chelek in the karban, but the Ramban thinks pshat is she doesn't bring the karban herself, either because she's disqualified or because it's not fair to ask her to bring a karban that's going to prove her guilt. And there is an assumption in the middle part, it's a long section of the Torah, there is an assumption in the middle part that she completely did it. At the end, there's the possibility that she didn't do it, but there's a sense that she did. Okay, so the Ramban says, that's the point. He brings the karban, it's his karban, not hers. And then just a linguistic point, says the Ramban, Vitam ha-se'orim shetihiyeh sa'arat chamat Hashem chama yotza sa'ar mitcholel al rosh harisha'a yochul. He says, it's even though they're not spelled the same, he says se'orim with a sin, and sa'ar, a storm, with a samach, they're essentially the same word. And he says the idea that you bring se'orim is because this has caused a gigantic storm in the marriage. Ukinyan slil se'orim ha'amur begidon shepitra oto l'sar u'mehuma rabba. In the story of Gidon, when he's going to take 300 people to beat 15,000 people, and he goes in the middle of the night to see what's going on in the camp of Midian, and he hears somebody telling the story that there was a sa'ar, which is understood to mean with se'orim, with a samach, with a sin, but it's understood in the drasha to mean with a samach, that there's going to be some kind of great upheaval, and that inspires Gidon. And so says the Ramban, the same pshat here. Se'orim is not because he asta ma'aseh nevala kibehema, so that she should bring a karban of a behema, because the Ramban says she's not bringing the karban at all. Rather, she's caused a storm, or he's caused a storm, or there is a storm, and therefore it makes sense to bring a karban of se'orim to mention the storm. That's the first Ramban on sota. Let's do one more Ramban because it's really, really significant to the whole mitzvah itself, and it's something that I'm sure that everyone has thought of. In the psukim, it's pasuk chaf. It really could have been in any pasuk. Va'ad ki satis tachas ishteich v'chi nitmeis va'itein ishbacha shechavtomi baladei isheich. Since you cheated on your husband and you slept with someone else, v'ishbiach karenet ha'isha b'shvat ha'ala, etc., etc. In a longish Ramban, I'm skipping the very beginning of it. The Ramban says the following: V'hinei ein bechal mishpetei haTorah davar talui b'neis zulati ha'inyan hazeh shehu pele v'neis kavua sheya'aseh b'Yisrael. Says the Ramban, and we've mentioned before, the Ramban has a very complicated relationship with miracles. Says the Ramban, there is no miracle that we can rely on, that the Torah refers to as a source of figuring out what happened, except for this, right? This is a miracle. The idea that if she's guilty, she's going to drink the mei sota, and literally it's going to explode her stomach, right? That's not b'derech hateva. There's nothing natural about that. There's nothing that says, if within nature, if you cheated on your husband, this is going to prove it. Says the Ramban, it's a nes. Now, it's kind of interesting. Why would that be? So says the Ramban, and here's an important point. V'neis kavua sheyaseh b'Yisrael b'hiyotam rubam osim ritzono shel makom. A huge qualification. Says the Ramban, this miracle of sota water only applies if most of the Jews are keeping the Torah, if most of the Jews are deserving of a miracle. Ki chafetz l'man tzidko liyaser hanashim shelo ta'asena kizimat yeter ha'amim. There's something about cheating on your spouse, the Ramban says, that makes the Jews lower, that makes them like Gentiles, that makes them like non-Jews. And God, Kiviyachol, is especially offended by that kind of behavior. So he has set up a circumstance, he set up a mechanic by which we can figure out liyaser hanashim shelo ta'asena kizimat yeter ha'amim, to stop women from cheating on their husbands. V'linakot Yisrael min hamamzerut sheyihiyu re'uyim lahashrod shchina b'tocham. Right? If you want the shchina to be shora in your midst, see, obviously you can't have mamzerus. You can't have children born out of, here it's a broader term, children born out of wedlock. That's not really what a mamzer means. A mamzer is, I'm married to someone else, she's married to someone else, we have relations, that child is a mamzer. It's not people who are not married who have relations, but nevertheless, it's the same point. Ulefikach pasaka inyan hazem misha'a sheniskalkalu ba'averot. Therefore, the Ramban says, historically, the miracle of sota, the miracle of sota water, and the test of sota stopped when the Jews, for lack of a better term, stopped being frum. When most of Klal Yisrael were not shomer Torah mitzvos, why would the miracle work? Kmo shamru misha rabu hanoafim pasku me sota. Right, that's what the Gemara says. When people cheated, so the miracle stopped working. Why? Shenema lo efkora al benotechem ki siznenov va'al kalotechem ki tenalfena ki heim am hazonot yipardu va'am hakdoshot yizbechu va'am lo yavin yilabeit. Ve'ena katuv omer shetiyena hanashim hanoafot piturot min ha'avon ba'avur shebalem noafim. Doesn't mean to say, says the Ramban, that women will get away with it. There won't be any punishment because their husbands are immoral. So if they're immoral, it'll all be fine. No, because God is offended by this. It's not just inequality in a relationship. It's not just, well, my husband cheated, so I could cheat. No, they'll be punished. Rak shelo ya'aseh b'am hanes hagadol hazeh shu na'aseh lahem lichvodam v'lihiyotam am kadosh. They'll still be punished. But the miracle of sota water, which is clearly limited to people whom God shines his favor on and who feel close to God and who ki'ilu deserve that miracle to keep them, to keep their behavior correct, that's going to stop. V'heim lo yavinu b'tova azot v'lo yichpetzu ba. If you're immoral, so you're not going to value the miracle of sota. It doesn't mean anything to you because, God forbid, if it was turned around, you'd be guilty. Zeu shamar va'am lo yavin yilabeit kiloma yilchadu bisichluto v'chein ve'avil sfatam yilabeit. Okay, the world is going to change. And when you're no longer a person who feels close to God, when you're no longer a person who feels that this is a significant event, and if your wife, God forbid, cheated on you, it's offensive to you, it's offensive to God, and she should be punished because she's behaved improperly, no reason for the miracle. Okay, ve'ein ha'ish minu kamei avon ein hamayim. I'm sorry. Yeah, ein ha'ish minu kamei avon ein hamayim bodkim et ishto. If you're not moral, if the husband is not a good person, the sota water won't work. Because it works, it's true, it's a miracle. And it's a miracle that has to do with shalom bayis, right? Because if you warned your wife and then you think that she cheated on you, you can't live together again unless she drinks the sota water and she's found to be innocent, right? So it is a supernatural miracle. People ask, what about tsaras, right? The Ramban says this is the only miracle kavua in the Torah. What about tsaras? So tsaras is not, I think the answer is obvious. Tsaras is supernatural, and the Ramban agrees with that. But it's not like tsaras is going to prove who's chayav and who's pater, who's tameh and who's tar. It doesn't work that way. Tsaras is a sign from God that. There are all kinds of events in the Torah that are signs from God. But sota is something much more supernatural. Sota is something where you say, okay, I'm going to bring her to the Beis HaMikdash, she's going to drink the sota water, and then miraculously the sota water is going to tell me whether she's chayiv or she's patur. That is unique. And of course, then the Ramban, like the Rambam, who we don't have time to quote, and other people point out the obvious, which is it only works when everything is working for Klal Yisrael, when the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the way it's supposed to be, and not just, if the husband is immoral, it's not going to prove anything, it's not going to work. And therefore, it seems to me that even in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, Chazal stopped this. Obviously, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, they would have stopped it because it would be almost impossible to do. But even when there was a Beis HaMikdash, when the men of Klal Yisrael were not the way they should be, the sota water stopped. Okay, let's go on to the next big topic. The next big topic in the parsha is nazir. And it yields sort of a fascinating philosophic discussion. Says the Torah, V'ikrivet korbanot l'Hashem keves ben shnato tamim echad la'olah v'chavso achat bat shnata tamima l'chatat v'ayilachat tamim l'shlamim v'sal matzah. Okay, that's the korban that a nazir brings. But more specifically, says the Torah, V'asa hakohen echad lechatat ve'echad le'olah v'chiper alav me'asher chata al hanafesh v'kidash et rosho bayom hahu. The nazir, as part of the process of becoming tahor and leaving the nazirus, has to bring a korban. And not just any korban, he has to bring a chatas. And everybody wants to know, what did he do wrong? Why should he bring a chatas? A chatas is brought in response to a sin. He's a tzaddik. He just successfully completed his nazirus. Says the Ramban, V'tam ha-chatat sheyakriv ha-nazir biyom melot yimei nizro lo nitparesh. Torah doesn't tell us why. Va'al derech ha-pshat ki ha-ish hazen. The Ramban thinks this is pshat. It's fascinating. Ki ha-ish hazeh chotei nafsho bimlot ha-nizirut. When this person successfully completes for 30 days, let's say, he doesn't drink mechartzanim vadyain vadzag. He's not metamel l'meis. Doesn't do anything wrong. Kihu ata nazir bikdushato va'avodat Hashem. Says Ramban. Right now, he's on a really high level. He's a nazir l'Hashem. V'ra'ui hayalo sheyazir la'olam. He should remain a nazir. In a perfect world, he'd be a nazir forever. V'ya'amod kol yamav nazir v'kadosh le'lokav. He'll be different. He'll be better than us. He'll be great. Kinyan shene'emar va'akim mibnechem l'neviim u'mibachurechem l'nezirim. This kind of assumes the conclusion, right? Being a navi is the greatest thing ever. If you could be a navi, who wouldn't be a navi? So says the Ramban, if you could be a nazir, who wouldn't be a nazir? Hishva to hakatuv l'navi. It compares a nazir to a prophet. Uktiv kol yimei nizro kadoshu l'Hashem. V'hinei hu tzarich kapara bishuvo lihitamei b'tavat ha'olam. Says the Ramban, the nazir, when he returns to be a member of society, when he returns to be like you and me, he needs kapara for that, because he was on a level way above us, and now he decided he's going to return to the rest, to the world of the rest of us, to a world where non-Kohanim can become tameh, where we can drink wine and grape juice and grapes and all these things that the nazir can't do. And the decision to move down a level of kedusha, to move down from what he was, something akin to being a prophet, to what we are, regular Jews, says the Ramban, that is on some level a sin, and that needs kapara, and for that he brings a chatas. Now, that's the exact opposite of at least one day in the Gemara, and people usually, juxtapose this, right? The other possibility is, why does a nazir bring a chatas? Because he sinned by becoming a nazir, right? That's what the Gemara seems to say. God told you, these are the things you can partake of in this world, and you decided on your own that what God permitted to us should still be asur, right? You decided on your own. Yes, God said you can be metamel l'meis, but I'm not going to be metamel l'meis. God said I can drink wine, but I'm not going to drink wine, right? God, the philosophic approach is God gave us the world to enjoy. And when you make a decision that you're not going to get hana from something that God explicitly told you you're allowed to get hana from, then you have to bring a chatas. So, most people juxtapose the two sides. I'm bringing a chatas because I chose not to get hana from something that God allowed me to get hana from, versus the Ramban, I'm bringing a chatas because I could have lived my whole life as a nazir, and now I'm going down a level. That's a sin in and of itself. I think the two things are not that far apart, because it could be you could limit the Ramban to somebody who's successfully completed Naziros. Meaning the Ramban might say there are people out there, and I'm putting words in the Ramban's mouth here, it's true. There are people out there, I think the Ramban would say, who really could be holier. And how do I know that? Because they've just done it. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever the period of time of their Naziros is, they were successful. And it means they really have within them the capability to be Nazirim, to be Neviim, to be something different than the rest of us. There are people who are different than the rest of us. They're called Kohanim, they're called Neviim. They have different halachos. Overwhelmingly the same halachos, but on certain things, it's different. And I think the Ramban would say, if you've proven that you could live your life on a higher level, and it's not for everybody, but if you've proven that you can successfully do that, and now you decide, I'm going to return, to the regular sins, I'm going to return to the life that everybody else returns to, that's a sin. Because you've proven that you could be more, and you choose now to be less, and for that you have to bring a chatas. Okay, that's the philosophic discussion. There's much, much more to say about that, and people can and should, discuss that amongst themselves. That's the end. That's the one we're going to do on Nazir. And now that leaves us with the big section of the parsha, and let's be honest, it's boring. If you're in shul and you're hearing Parshas Naso, you can't but think to say to yourself, why? Why is every nasi, why is the korban repeated in full? Bayom HaRishon, Bayom HaSheni, Bayom HaShlishi. It's really, really long. If we counted psukim, basically the Parshas HaNesiim and the bringing of the korbanos is 50, 60, no, more than that. Till the end of it, it's 89 psukim. It's enormous. Okay, so what's going on here? So let's just pull out a little piece of the Ramban. It's a very long piece of the Ramban, but in the middle he says, Va'od bazeh ta'am acher b'midrasham. He says, there's another medrash, or there's another idea on why it is that the Torah lists in full every nasi's korban as if he's the only one who brought it. Ki lechol echad meha Nesiim Allah b'machshava lahavi chanuka lamizbeach v'shetihiyeh b'zeh hashiur. He says every single one of the Nesiim, not just Nachshon ben Aminadav, but Nisanel ben Tzuar and Eliyav ben Chelon and Elitzur ben Shteyur, etc., they all thought on their own to bring the exact same korban. Ki l'chol echad me'anesim Allah b'machshava lavi chanuka lamizbeach v'shetihiyeh b'zeh hashiur. Aval, and this is an unbelievable chiddush, says the Ramban. Aval Nachshon chashav b'shir hazeh ta'am echad. Nachshon had a certain idea and a certain kavana when he brought the korban. V'zulato kol echad me'nesiim chashav ta'am b'fnei atzmo. And every nasi decided to bring Ka'arat kesef, echad, shloshim, u'meyam, mishkala, mizrak, echad, kesef, shim, shekel. But each person had a different kavana. So the Medrash says, for example, Amru, shechashav nachshon, sheyavi ka'arat kesef, sheyihiyeh minyan otiotea, teisha u'me'ot u'shloshim kineged shnotav shel adam. Okay, Nachshon thought, I'll bring a ka'arat kesef, which numerically, b'gematria, gets to 930. That's how long Adam HaRishon lived. U'mishkala shloshim maya kineged toldot she'amid. And, the gematria of the gold that you brought is 100 so the years, is 930. And then the mishkal is 130, which is Adam's age when he gave birth to Shes. Okay? But the bigger point of the Ramban is, and this I think is a really significant point, is you could do the same thing and have different kavanah, right? And that's fine. And that's exactly what happened with the Nesiim. And if the Torah just said, v'chein hevi elitzur ben shteyur, v'chein, you wouldn't get the message. The message is, when Eliasaph ben Deuel brought the korban, he brought every single part of the korban exactly the same as the other Nesiim, but he had his own kavanah. 12 Nesiim thought of bringing the korban, bringing the exact same korban, but they all wanted to bring the exact same korban for a different reason. And if I could expand on that, I think the Ramban would say it's true for all mitzvos. And the Rav Soloveitchik certainly said this explicitly, which is, there is a reason for a mitzvah. And there's certainly a Maisa mitzvah, and that's the mitzvah we have to do. But the meaning of the mitzvah could be different for me than for you. Right? When I take a lulav and esrog on sukkah, so I struggle a little bit because I don't really understand what I'm doing. It's not called the classic chok, but for me it is. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think the Ramban is saying, well, I can have kavanah for the dew or for the rain or for nature, and the guy next to me who's doing the exact same mitzvah, and if somebody's looking at us, we're doing the exact same thing, he has a different kavanah. He has kavanah for God's strength. He has kavanah that he wants his wife to have children. He has kavanah for refuah shlema for somebody. It's the same mitzvah. We're doing the exact same thing. If you looked at it from the outside, certainly, during Nanuim on Sukkot, everybody's doing the exact same thing. But says the Ramban, it doesn't have to mean the same thing for everyone. It could have a meaning for me that it doesn't have for you. And therefore, the repetition of the korban of the Nesiim is teaching us a really, really important message. Yes, we all keep the same Torah, we all keep the same mitzvahs, and we're all committed to do the same exact thing. But we're not all the same person. And it could be, in certain situations, says the Ramban, I can have kavanah X, and you can have kavanah Y. And we're both yotzei, and it's the same mitzvah, but I had kavanah for one thing, and you had kavanah for another thing. The fact that externally we look like we're doing the exact same thing doesn't mean that internally it's the same for each of us. And if that's true, I'll go a step further. I think 1 year I could take lulav and have one kavanah, and the next year I could have another kavanah. It means something to me right now, right? Mitzvahs are supposed to be meaningful to us, and meaningful to us often means to me in my way, and to you in your way, and not exactly the same. And so when it comes to Tamei HaMitzvos, I think Rav Soloveitchik really believes when it comes to Tamei HaMitzvos, it can be personal for us. We can think of our own reasons because we want mitzvahs to be meaningful. We want chukim to be meaningful. The Rav said this in a piece on Para Aduma, which is the quintessential chok that no one will ever figure out. But he said the fact that no one will ever figure it out doesn't mean that it can't have meaning for me. And the meaning that it has for me might be different than the meaning that it has for you. And he didn't quote it this way, but I think the source for that is this Ramban. The Ramban who says every Nasi brought the exact same korban down to the last shekel and down to the last ounce of weight, exactly the same thing, but each Nasi had a different idea and a different kavanah and a different meaning in the mitzvahs. Okay, so we did Rambans on sota, the fact that it's a miracle, it's the only miracle we can rely on. The fact that the Baal brings the korban for his wife, both of them are very interesting ideas. We saw the Ramban on nazir, which may be a major philosophic discussion about our relationship with the world and the benefit that we get from the world and the hana that we get from the world. And then we saw the Nesiim, where the Ramban says they all did the same thing, but they did it for different reasons. Yashkoch to everybody, Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you next week.